Yeah, and there's still suspicion that she didn't do it. Big time. And my own self, I don't think she did it. I can tell you that right now.
I never questioned the fact that she actually had done it. I still don't think to this day that she's the one that actually did it, but
She didn't. I know that. I mean, she probably wanted to, but she didn't do it. But there's nothing we can do about that now.
You want to talk about what you mean by that?
She covered for somebody else. So Helen wouldn't hurt anybody. Never.
I'm Jana Pruden, and this is the final episode of In Her Defense from the Globe and Mail. Episode 8, Freedom.
A home on the farm. We haven't given up so far. In the beautiful wild, in the beautiful, beautiful wild.
The theory that Helen didn't actually kill Miles comes up a lot. In a way, it would make sense. To go back to that old RCMP metaphor, if Helen could keep the whole responsibility pie for herself, she would. One thing I know about Helen is that she would do whatever she could to protect her kids. And it's never been exactly clear what happened on the farm that night. Daryl said he heard 3 gunshots. The pathologist found 2 bullets in Miles's brain. In court, Helen admitted to shooting Miles once, killing him instantly. But the agreed statement of facts is only what's accepted as truth by the court. It doesn't mean that's what actually happened. And a lot of people I talked to really didn't buy it. I should say that there's not any evidence that Helen didn't do it. It's more that people who know Helen can't imagine that she would be capable of it. But it came up enough that I started to question it myself. What if Helen wasn't the one who killed Miles? I asked Wes first.
Maybe one of the reasons people say that is they think that your mom is so nice that she wouldn't be capable of it. Someone said to me, she wouldn't hurt a fly. They didn't think she could do it.
They didn't watch my father mentally and physically abuse and torture my mother for day in, day out, for damn near 20 fucking years, until she swallowed 600 fucking Tylenol 3s and started drinking in an attempt to end her life, and then come crying to me after the fact that she was sorry she wasn't strong enough and she couldn't handle it, she had to leave me. I didn't tell you about those nights either. But there's about 4 of those instances where she tried to end her own life by pills and booze. So yeah, she doesn't seem like she'd be that kind of person either. But you know what, when you get somebody that treats you like that, you're not much of any kind of person at that time. Yeah, you can be fixed, you can be healed after, or whatever. You can be changed back again. But during that time, you're not a person. You don't have feelings of your own.
Then I asked Neil. You'll remember that he didn't want me to use his voice on this podcast, but he told me, everybody has their breaking point. He said, those people can think whatever they want to think, but they didn't live it. They weren't there. And he didn't want to talk anymore about that night. Finally, I had to ask Helen. It was a hard question. We'd gotten to know each other really well by then, and I worried it would upset her. But I also knew I had to ask. I put it to her in a roundabout kind of way.
It's kind of I don't know if it's a weird question. It's maybe a bit of a delicate question. Everyone I've talked to doesn't think that you actually shot him.
Well, that's all I can say is that's not the case.
I think what it comes from is,
Nobody believes that I could actually do something like that.
yes.
No, I don't believe. I find it hard to believe myself that I actually done it. I don't have 100% recollection of the event itself. I mean, I try to take myself back there and replay it, but I can't. There's a place there where I do not have any recollection of actually doing it until it's immediately afterwards. So whether it was the gunshot itself that's the only point I can remember on is afterwards, and the hearing of the shot and then seeing them lying there dead, and it was just horrible, horrible, horrible. Like in the state of shock that I was in, I don't know. That was the worst fear I've ever felt. Like and almost, I don't know, because I couldn't, the not knowing how, like it happened, but how, and at that point, it was just the two people there, myself and Miles.
I think it's, Lawrence said she couldn't hurt a fly. I do think it is that thinking of that they just cannot imagine that you could ever do that.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I was driven by something, I guess for the X amount of years of the abuse, and it could only take so much and you snap. I mean, I guess I just had enough.
There's another thing that's been nagging at me, and it may be something you've thought about too. It's a big piece missing from this story. Why was Miles the way he was? What made him like that? And was there something that could have helped him? People told me Miles came from a good family. His brother Lee is well-liked and respected in the area, but Lee didn't want to speak with me. One person told me Miles had always been a bully, even when he was a kid. And Neil told me, I think he was just one of those naturally bad people. I'm sure there were people out there who liked Miles, but I'm also sure that the only people who knew what he was really like were Helen and the boys.
Did you ever think about, in that period, why he was like that? You said his family seemed really nice and he seemed like, did you ever, I guess, kind of try to analyze what made him be like that?
Oh, for sure, yeah. I don't know. Like I said, I felt sorry for him, and even years later, like in this period, I still kind of felt sorry for him because it's kind of pathetic, really. I mean, for a person to be that insecure and so full of self-pity, that just, it was poor me, and the world owed me a favor. Like, and I couldn't understand where that come from because, looking at his parents and his upbringing, wasn't that bad.
Did he ever show any kind of signs of remorse, ever apologize, ever, seem to recognize that he wasn't treating his family well?
No. I honestly think he thought it was just natural and the way it was.
We'll never know exactly what happened in the chaos of that night on the farm, but I think it's clear everyone in the family played some role in it, whether disposing of the body and evidence or maintaining the lie of Miles's disappearance for 6 years. I also know that the truth was weighing on Helen and Neil, and I think it would have come out eventually.
I can't really say a lot about how Daryl felt because he didn't really share a lot with me. But it bothered Neil. The same as it bothered me, like it was our conscience that we're living with, this lie that we come up with that was, is it ever going to come to an end, or we'd have to live with this for the rest of our lives, never knowing when something could surface.
That sounds like its own form of hell. Why do you think Daryl went to the police?
I don't know for sure, but I've heard stories that he was in trouble, because he was into the drugs pretty heavy, and he'd gotten himself into trouble and done it for a plea bargain to get his own self out of the situation.
I heard that story as well. Do you think do you believe that that's what happened?
Yes, because it's difficult for me because I honestly believe that I think if it was his conscience that was bothering him, he would have come to me. Or at least I certainly would have hoped that he would have. So I don't think it was that he couldn't live with himself anymore. It was just all about him. He needed to protect himself, and he didn't care whether he buried his mother and brothers in the process. It's not like it wasn't just myself and Neil and Wesley that were affected by this. Neil and Wesley's families were put in a difficult situation.
And what was it like for you knowing that Daryl had done that?
It was excruciating, and it still is. I don't even know. Like I don't want to say that I hate him. I mean, he is my son. I still care about him. But then on the other hand, when I look at it, he's not my son anymore.
He said some things that I think made him look very innocent in the whole process.
Oh, very much so, yes. Which is the hardest part of all of it. How could he have done that? If it was really bothering him that badly, why did he lie about it? That's why I don't think it was his conscience. Because if it was his conscience, how could he live with his own lies?
Daryl didn't agree to speak with me, but in his fourth statement to RCMP, he said he came forward after he heard the police were investigating his father's disappearance again. Daryl said he didn't have anything to do with his father's death, or getting rid of the body, or any evidence, and that he only went along with the story because his mother threatened him. He told Constable Carlson, "I'm the kind of guy that if I did do something, I would tell you. I'm not afraid to go back to jail. If I do the crime, I do my time."
Is there anything that you would want people to know about what happened?
There's a lot of stories. I'm not going to tell them who's right, who's telling the truth, and who's wrong. I know who's right. I know who's lying. I know who did what. And I know what some people are going to say about me. I really don't give a fuck. And as about the whole right and wrong stuff, who's telling the truth, that's the stories that are discrepancy between me, my mother, and Neil, and Daryl's story. So one of us is fucking full of shit and one is true.
Daryl's story meaning it was a great house, there was no abuse, and then you guys all did this, and it had nothing to do with him. Or specifically
Yes.
Neil and your mother, and he
Yes,
had no
and
part of
Daryl
it.
was just an innocent little bystander. Daryl never helped bend and break legs to fit a 6-foot person into a 4.5-foot truck toolbox. He never did that, and he never fucking welded that lid shut, apparently. He never helped Neil dump it in the fucking dugout with the 300 pounds of tractor weights in the bottom of it, plus the 240-pound occupant. So you're looking at 500-pound toolbox. You've met my mother. She's strong. You think she can manhandle a 500-pound toolbox in a boat? 12-foot aluminum boat on a dugout that's 40 feet deep? By herself? Not happening. Do you think her and Neil could do it? Not a fucking chance.
And finally, there's another theory I heard a lot from Helen's family and friends. Something they think would have changed everything about Helen's case.
And you know what the sad part of this all is? If she wouldn't have just done it, called the police and said this is what happened, she wouldn't be in jail today.
My big question to both of them was, why in the hell did you do what you did? I mean, he threatened you so many times. Okay, you shot him. Call the police. Why did you do what you did? You know, that was bad. That's what really made a mess of things. If they'd have called the police right there, I guarantee you, he had that handgun with him. It's self-defense. Why in that devil did they do what they did? But they panicked and they did it. Unfortunate. And they went to a lot of trouble to cover it up, and from burying the car and getting rid of the body, the whole 9 yards. It was bad thing to do. You know? And I see all they could say was, oh, we just panicked. They didn't know what to do. So, but it was a mistake, that's for sure.
What did you think about that?
I had a hard time imagining how they could do what they did.
Why do you want people to know more about what happened? Why did you agree to talk to me and to...
I'd like people to know the truth, if it's possible. I mean, over the years, like I keep saying, she couldn't report things. I mean, she'd have been beaten so bad, and the kids would have been too. So it was all kept dark secret in the closet. If it would have been reported, it would have been a whole different story, because the police would have been out there a lot. But then they would have been in a lot of trouble too. So, I don't know. How do you win?
This was a scenario I played out in my mind. What if Helen had just called the police right away that night and told them she shot Miles? After so many years of keeping the abuse a secret, she would have had to go into an interrogation room and tell constables Carlson and Pratch, or some other officers like them, all about the abuse she'd suffered. She'd have to say all those terrible and difficult things out loud for the very first time. And they would have to believe her. Would they have seen it as self-defense? Or would they have charged her with murder anyway? That too is something we will never know. Like what might have happened if Helen had decided to go to trial.
Do you feel like if a jury heard and understood what you have lived through, that they would have seen that this was self-defense and they would have found you not guilty?
I don't know. I can't answer that because I don't know. At the time, maybe more so than now. Like I said, I've done a lot of reading, and it's really soured my opinion of going to trial. I'm kind of glad that I didn't, after some of the books that I've read. You know, Elizabeth Shee's book. You know, they weren't very sympathetic in those cases.
During their sentencing, the judge said Helen and Neil were good people who reacted poorly when other options were open to them. I've thought a lot about what other options were open to Helen, given what she knew then. Options that didn't end up with her being killed by Miles or taking her own life. After all this time, I still don't know what they were.
My concern is that, whoever is listening to this podcast, there are Helens in every community across this country. Every community, rural communities, big cities, small towns, they're everywhere. I think a lot of people care about Helen because people are basically good. And when they see injustice, they respond and they speak out. And so because of the fact that this violence is so unfortunately universal in our world, that when someone actually stands up for her right to live and her kids' rights to live, that's something that so many people can relate to, because I think lots and lots of women have thought about it. What do I do? How do I get out of this? How do I escape? What if he does this to me? What if he threatens this? What if he does that? What if he does this to the kids? These are questions that no one should ever have to ask of themselves, and yet they are asked on a daily and nightly basis in this country and around the world.
Recently, I called the mother of Candy Benet, the victim of the first domestic homicide I ever covered, almost 23 years ago. I wanted to tell Candy's mother that I was going to talk about her on this podcast, and that I've never forgotten her. That I've thought about Candy's murder many times through the years. She told me how much Candy is missed, and how devastating Candy's murder still is for her kids and her family and all those who loved her, all these years later. As Candy's sister said, Rocky not only killed her and robbed her of her life, he unilaterally changed the lives of hundreds of people. Nothing really stays behind closed doors. That's the reason Helen agreed to talk to me, and why she wanted to share her story with you. Is this her?
That looks like it could be her. I would say that's her.
Yeah, I definitely think that's her.
Okay, so I'm gonna take my mic off and leave it on the dash for her.
And yeah, that's definitely her. Hi. Great. How are you? Good. Do you want to sit in the car where it's warm?
Hi Kim, how are you? I'm well, thank you. Hey.
Oh. Yeah, it's a cold one.
It is. I walked up from
My colleague Amber Bracken and I were sitting outside the Edmonton Institution for Women on an extremely cold winter day. It was just before Christmas 2022, the morning of Helen's first appearance before the National Parole Board. Helen was asking for unescorted passes, which would allow her to leave the prison alone for the first time. She'd be able to go back to Camrose, to see her family, to be out there in the wide open country. Many of Helen's supporters and pen pals had watched on Zoom. Senator Kim Pate flew in from Ottawa to help Helen at the hearing. Amber and I were waiting for Kim to come outside and tell us how it went.
She was incredibly nervous, and what else can I say? Mm-hmm. She was a bundle of nerves, and was very worried about the decision, and worried about she's worried about everybody else in her life, as typically Helen. Like, she's thinking about her kids and her sisters and her niece and everybody, and her friends, and kept thanking everybody for their support, and but said she was really nervous, and I thought she did amazingly well during the hearing, and I was extremely pleased that they made the decision they did. It was the right decision.
The hearing was so different from Helen's interrogation and from her appearances in court. Helen spoke about herself and her life with Miles, and the board listened to her. The parole board members acknowledged that Helen had committed a violent crime and that someone had died. But they also said that what Helen did had to be considered in the context of the abuse she'd been living with. The parole board also noted Helen had been diagnosed with battered woman syndrome in 2019, which had never been mentioned in court. The board said the outpouring of support for Helen played a huge part in her healing.
And I believe I think in the end the count was around 110 or 111 letters of support, including, Sharon's neighbors, including people who were customers at Helen's former employer, including, people from all across the country, people who have picked, because of the media attention, because of your story, as well as your initial story, and the attention to the appeal, the number of people who wrote, and they range from women who escaped violence themselves, police officers, social workers, retired teachers.
The parole board not only granted Helen temporary passes, but went a step further and pre-approved her for day parole. That meant Helen knew the day she would get out of prison.
When the decision came down, Helen looked at me, I looked at her, and we were both like, I think we both registered, wow, it worked, it happened. It's, the smile on her face, the minute we were all done. She sat there very stoically throughout after the decision, but I asked her what she was going to do this afternoon. She said she was going to be letting it all sink in.
It's still overwhelming for me. Like, it's just, I'll sit down and I'll start going through some of these letters and some of the stuff that it's just like, wow, like, how did this happen? Why? I'm not an important person. I'm just me. Where's all this coming from?
Well, you are an important person, I would argue.
No, I don't think so. I'm just an ordinary person. An ordinary person that made some bad choices and that turned to worse, and I don't even know how to fast track it to put it into words.
I mean, you're a person that had a lot of really bad things happen to you.
Yeah, bad luck, I guess. I don't know. But I guess I can't really have done it. You can't really call it luck either. It's maybe a lot of bad things happen, but I'm the only one who could have changed that. Making the wrong choice to start with, kind of set the wheel in motion. I don't know how to look at it. I don't know how to put it into words. Like, I don't want somebody else's pity. So poor you. I feel so sorry for you. Like, it's not about that. It's very unfortunate how things turned out, yes, but it's definitely been quite the life experience so far. And it's not over yet either.
Helen got out on parole in March 2023 and started working at A1 Rentals again. Amber and I stopped in to see her one of her first days back at work.
Hi there. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
Good, how are you?
I'm a little better now.
Yeah, boy, it's funny, I was saying to my editor, and I was telling him we were going to stop in and see you, and I said, like, this is the first time I'm going to see you in real life.
Yeah.
You look lighter and happy. It's just like...
Much lighter.
It's so wonderful to see you out here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Helen said people had been coming into A1 just to welcome her home. They didn't even buy anything. They just came to say hi. When we saw Helen, she was feeling good and confident, but she was also taking it slow.
Yeah, because I was just kind of worried if I push myself too much, I'm going to have a setback or shut down or something, and I don't want that.
Yeah.
And Guy's really supportive. He said, just take the time you need and ease into it.
I mean, it's interesting. It's not just like coming back to normal life. This is like the first time in your entire life that...
So I'm not looking over my shoulder anymore. Yeah, them 6 years were pretty rough.
Yeah.
Over and done, and only one way to go, and that's up. All for the better. But it's coming. Every day's getting better, and every time I push myself to do something different, it gets easier after I've done it.
I talked to Helen again the other day. It was her birthday. She told me that on her way to work that morning, her favorite song came on the radio. It doesn't get played much these days. It's an old Willie Nelson number called Nothing I Can Do About It Now. It's about accepting all the things you did and didn't do, about forgiving the things you can forgive, about surviving and moving forward. It felt like a sign. Helen is 59 years old, and for the first time in her life, she's free. In Her Defense was made by Kasia Mihailovich and me, Jana Pruden. Amber Bracken did our field recording, and the photos of Helen and her family you can see online at tgam.ca/inherdefense. In Her Defense was mixed by David Crosby. It was recorded at MacEwan University by Emily Rubaita, Sheena Rossiter, and Sasha Stanojevic. Our executive editor was Angela Pacenza. We owe a big thanks to head of visual journalism Matt Frainer and head of editing Ian Bokoff. Our theme song was The Fighter by Jenn Grant, arranged for this show by David Crosby. You can email me personally at jpruden@globeandmail.com. If you're experiencing domestic violence and want to talk to someone, you can find resources and your nearest shelter at sheltersafe.ca. This podcast is dedicated to all those who have fought domestic violence and those who are still fighting.
A home on the farm. We haven't given up so far. A home on the farm. We haven't given up so far.
Take care, and thank you for listening.
Oops. A little bit of air. Little Dukes of Hazzard there.
As we're driving Evan's car. As I'm driving Evan's car.
I don't know if this is apocryphal, but I heard...
Shoot, I missed the turn.
Uh-oh.
It's okay, I'll just
Missed the turn. But I heard that... Should I be navigating for
I'm
you?
okay.
You're doing everything. Just sitting here chitty-chatting.
Okay, wait.
One day last summer, there was a little party for Helen at a farm outside Camrose. It was an absolutely perfect prairie day. There were kids running around and tables full of home-cooked food. Cows and pigs grazed in the fields. On the guest list that day were family members and old friends, and other people who'd helped and supported Helen, some of whom she'd been writing to for years, but never met in person. There were survivors of domestic violence, people who heard about Helen in the news and saw themselves in her story, then reached out to see how they could help. There was a senator doing dishes, a defense lawyer and her husband sitting at a table in the shade, a group of women who had asked God every day to reduce Helen's sentence and thought their prayers had been answered. And there was Helen, in the middle of it all, in a t-shirt and a crisp new pair of Wranglers, smiling.
Okay, well, here we are anyway. We're in the right place. And
Helen has invited us to come just as people, not as reporters, and she asked us to not record, not take any pictures, and so that's what we're going to do. We're going to a party that our listeners aren't invited to.
Feels kind of mean to them.
It does feel kind of mean to them, but I'm excited for Helen to have this like next phase in her life, you know? She opened up a lot of things, and well, a lot of things came out about her without her even agreeing to open up, and then she did agree to talk about it, and you know, at some point her public story will be over. And I think a lot about how this is really going to be, this is the first time in her life that she's ever really been free, you know, certainly since she was a teenager, since she met Miles, and I'm sure that'll have a lot of challenges, and yeah, I'm pretty excited to see how she's doing today.
Change in the law comes slowly and incrementally. That is its nature. It responds to changes in society. It seldom initiates them.